Let's talk prompt engineering. Since November 2022, when ChatGPT was released to the public, this concept of prompt engineering has just exploded. You have got numerous free courses, paid courses from many institutions on platforms like Coursera, edX, all teaching you the best ways to do prompt engineering. But what is prompt engineering really, and does it deserve the amount of attention it is getting? So in this video, what I'm going to do is to talk through three things about prompt engineering. One, I'm going to look at the reality of prompt engineering itself. Next, I'm going to share with you the way I approach prompt engineering. And finally, we'll look at some frameworks that are out there for prompt engineering. Okay. Before we get started, what is a prompt? Well, a prompt is just the instruction that you give a large language model or any generative AI tool. So let's say you're working with a large language model like ChatGPT or Google Gemini. Your question might be, you want to know the best way to plan a 3-day holiday in Venice. Okay, so you can just put a statement into these tools saying, plan a 3-day vacation in Venice for me. That is a prompt. Now, why do we have this concept of prompt engineering itself? So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to try and demystify some of this notion of prompt engineering, because what I feel is all this hype about prompt engineering has created a false barrier to entry for large language models. So you have a lot of people who are already a little reluctant to adopt new technologies. You've now thrown this whole technology of artificial intelligence into the public domain. Everyone is hearing about all the ethical issues with it, and people are already reluctant. Add to that, you now have this conversation that says if you don't have the proper prompt engineering skills, you're not going to get good results at all, which just makes people even more reluctant to try these tools. But the reality is, prompt engineering is not all the way it is talked about in many arenas. So let's look at some of the real issues of prompt engineering itself. I'll talk about the misconceptions first, and then I'll work through some facts about prompt engineering, okay? And prompt engineering, again, is just the way to write a prompt, okay? Right. So misconception number one is poor prompting results in poor results, poor responses. So if you don't give a tool a good prompt, you're not going to get good results. I would say that's not exactly true, right? It is, in my opinion, it is contextual. A prompt is poor only in the sense that it doesn't get, it doesn't get you exactly what you want in the first attempt. Then, okay, you can say your prompt wasn't exactly right and your prompt can be improved. However, if your intention is something completely different, then a prompt is a good prompt. So let me give you an example of a very simple prompt that says, let's take again the same holiday in Venice prompt, right? So plan a 3-day holiday in Venice for me. Some people might say that this is a poor prompt because it is so broad, right? So how can you make this a better prompt? And I'm using air quotes for better over here because, again, so what would be a better prompt? Would be if I were to say, I am a female in my 50s traveling alone to Venice in March, and I will be there for 5 days, but I want to vacation for 3 days. My budget is XYZ. My preferences for where I would like to stay are XYZ. Given these parameters, plan a vacation for me. Now, many people will tell you, this is a really good prompt because you have explicitly described all the different criteria for this vacation. And yes, they are very important. However, if your intention was to get a broad overview of a vacation in Venice, to include, maybe I want to get an idea of budget hostels that are available and five-star hotels that are available as well. Maybe I want to get a sense of more adventurous vacation activities and more and safer options as well. If it was just a complete brainstorming activity, then the first prompt of plan a vacation for me is the better prompt over here, because it will pull in a whole lot of options you had never thought about. When you start adding in so many criteria, it will suit this particular purpose perfectly. Problem is, you have narrowed it down so much that you're not going to get all the other things, all the other potential responses that you might have. So again, there is no poor prompting. It is contextual and depends on what you want to achieve. It is only poor insofar as it doesn't align with your expected outcome. Okay. Now, for the same example I just talked about, you've got two. The first one was a very short one. Now, when I add criteria, it becomes a much bigger prompt. You will even see some people writing page-long prompts with so many different criteria and so many different conditionalities. And again, the notion is the more details I give in, the more words I put in, the better my results are. In reality, the more parameters you put in and the more words you're throwing in, it can get confusing for the large language model, and it might skip over some important information for you. So more words is not necessarily equate to better results. Okay. The third misconception is, if I get the perfect prompt with all these words and all the conditions, then I'm going to get the perfect result. Well, there are a few issues over here. One is, we all know large language models can hallucinate. Just because you're putting in a really long prompt with all these conditions, it does not mean that the model is not going to hallucinate. That's still going to happen, right? You're still going to have the biases that are there built into it. You might try to mitigate them, but you still have to realize that they're going to be there. And regardless of how refined your prompts are, these issues will exist. So there is no notion of a perfect prompt. It's just you working on it and making it get you the best result that you want. Okay. And remember, the other aspect of perfect prompt is prompts change every day. What do I mean by that? Prompt responses change every day. The models, the large language models, are constantly being refined, right? So we started with GPT 3.5, we went to GPT 4, 4.0, then we went to O1. We also have now GPT O4, I think, and O5 coming up soon. Each of these are better than the previous versions. And they are so much better nowadays that any prompt that you put in today or just now and then do the same prompt in another chat line, you'll be getting completely different responses, because that's how these large language models are built. So there is no perfect prompt giving you this replicable perfect response. No, these responses are going to change. So these are a few misconceptions that you need to keep in mind, right? Then what is the reality of prompt engineering itself? Well, one is, prompt engineering is not a static skill. With the models changing so much, the way we prompt them is going to change as well. So with 3.5, you need to give it a lot more criteria. The new models of O1, O4, and O5, they are doing reasoning. The way they come to their response is through a lot of reasoning processes in the background, which means the way you, whatever prompt you put in, the way they read it and the way they reason through it is far more advanced than the versions that we have for free right now. So the way we talk to these models has to constantly keep changing based on the model and its capabilities. And that's a trial and error method. So there is no one perfect way to do prompt engineering. So you just got to keep remembering that it's not a static skill, it's constantly going to evolve. Okay? The next thing to consider is your large language models themselves are better at writing prompts than humans. Now, if that's the case, then what are we stressing out about so much with the intention of writing the best prompt? It's easier to just have the model itself write a better prompt for us. So given these issues, I encourage anyone I work with not to let this notion of prompt engineering hold you back, right? Think of it as a conversation, jump into it with the tool and start playing around. There is no right or wrong method of doing this. Yes, some are a little bit more optimal than others, and we'll talk about that, but there is no right or wrong. Okay, now all the information that I've just shared, I've actually written up about all this in a blog post, so I'll also put a link to the blog post along with this video. Now, if this is the situation, then how do I approach prompt engineering or writing prompts? Okay, so what I do for prompting is I use an inverted pyramid model, right? Kind of like a funnel. I start broad and then I narrow it down. So what do I mean by broad purpose? Again, I start with a very broad prompt. Like I said, vacation in Venice for 3 days. That's very broad. Okay. Now I add in more context to it. Depending on the response that you get for that vacation, I might now want to add in things like, I don't want a budget vacation. I want a slightly, a more comfortable vacation. Okay, so that's another context. I might add in the audience for this, which is with a woman in her 50s traveling alone. And any other criteria that I want, I could add into this as well. Now I'm going to go into guidelines and frameworks and these other things. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears a little bit and use an example of from an educational scenario. Okay, so let's think about writing course objectives. If I wanted to write course objectives for this AI course that you're taking right now, I could broadly say, give me 3 objectives for a course on AI in healthcare. Very broad. And it'll give me 3 objectives. Now I can start refining this down by saying, it could be in healthcare, which is my context. Who is my audience? It would be learners in a graduate program. Other context could be it's a 6-week course that that I'm designing, and it's going to be done fully asynchronously. So those are the extra context, audience, and conditions that I can throw onto that same prompt. Now, I'm doing an iterative process. I start with a broad prompt, look at the responses I'm getting, and then I start adding in the context and audience to see how that makes a difference. And again, this is because with a broad prompt, I like to brainstorm and see what new things I can get out of it. Okay. Now with objectives itself, you have a lot of different frameworks and guidelines for objectives. 2 you might be very familiar with are the SMART objectives and Bloom's taxonomy. So I could actually tell it, okay, so you've given me these 3 objectives. I like them, but I would like them to be aligned with SMART objectives or written in the style of Bloom's taxonomy. And so I'm now adding in guidelines and frameworks and to see what objectives it gives you. With prompt engineering and these tools, you don't stop at that. I want you to keep pushing these tools, and a very nice way of doing it is to have the tool itself critically assess the response it has given you. So for example, the way I've done this is, you've given me these objectives, they align with Bloom's taxonomy, that's very good. But now what I want you to do is, assume you are the dean of curriculum development. I want you to look at these objectives for this course, critically assess it and give me feedback. And it's very surprising at the feedback that the same tool will give you. Even though it generated all of the objectives itself, it always surprises me the really nice feedback it gives you. And in many instances, it'll even give you suggestions on how to improve these little gaps that it has. And then finally, the reusable template aspect of it, that's always a question mark that I do, in the sense of, if you were going to do the same thing repeatedly and you're very happy with this format that you're working on, then yes, you can put all of the prompts that you've written up right now into a complete reusable template. So this is the broad format that I have been using, and I found it very helpful for me personally. It's allowed me to try a lot of things, and because it's an iterative process, I don't expect it to be this kind of single shot prompt and I get my response and I'm moving on. No, I'm constantly playing with it and refining it to see how much better my responses can be. Okay, so I engage with the tool a lot more. Okay. So that's about my style of writing. And again, I will share another blog post on this with you. Finally, okay, so going back to this notion of the perfect prompt, right? People have come up with a multitude of frameworks for prompt engineering. This is a nice little mnemonic that you can use to craft the best prompt. You will see these around a lot. I'm going to show you two different slides with various frameworks there. There are also other frameworks. I did a very quick, informal look through the internet, and in the first few minutes, I identified, I think, up to 32 different frameworks of how to write the best prompt. So you can see it can get a little confusing and overwhelming for people. But let's take a look at some of the frameworks itself. Okay. Now, I really like this GIF because, it looks really nice. Not mine, was created by someone else. It's on the internet. I'll give you the link. But it really is kind of cute, isn't it? What I like about this is also the fact that it gives you the framework, and then it breaks down the framework for you and even gives you an example at times. Okay, so the websites do a really nice job of that. Do take a look at the links that I provide. So some of the things, let me just highlight some common ones. Okay, let's look at this one called RISE at the bottom. What you're talking about with RISE is R stands for the role, the input, the steps to use, and the execution. Okay, so when I say role, it's like the example of telling the tool to assume an identity. So you are the dean of curriculum development. That's a role that you're telling the tool to assume. What is the input? So input can also be the context and instructions that I want to give it. And that's like what I just explained, right? My context could be, this is a 6-week course for graduate students, whatever else you want to add in. Steps is another way of doing it, where you tell the tool to go through this whole prompt process, but do it step by step. And you can even ask it to stop after every step. So step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Next, do this. And then finally, you ask for the output that you want. So your output could be things like, give me a rubric in the format of a table. That's, I'm giving a direction on how this output has to be executed. Okay, so that's the RISE format or framework. As you can see, there are a number of different frameworks over here. Another framework, another set of frameworks is also, this is another website which had another set of frameworks, and this one repeats with the previous one. And again, this was a really informative web page where they talked about all of these and then gave examples as well. I will provide links for them. I shared this with you to just show you the spectrum of frameworks that are out there. So what do you do as a user, right? So I'll tell you the most common things you want to think about that'll optimize the way you do your prompts, okay? One is the what I mentioned in my previous slide, right? The idea of context, your audience, those are important, and that will give you a really good prompt. Next is having your tool assume a role can also be very effective. So the idea of the role is something that's good. The stepwise aspect of writing prompts is also helpful, especially when you're doing a really long prompt engineering kind of thing. All right. So for these, I would just say take a quick look through these different frameworks, get a sense of what they are, but really just play with it and be creative with your prompts. Push the tool to do more than you expect it to. The idea behind these tools is not that you give a prompt and get a response. No, you want this to be an enhancement of you, meaning trying to really critically and creatively think of what it is that you want to do, right? So for example, this vacation in Venice that I was talking about, right? I could ask it to design for me a vacation that is completely original, no one else has done it, put together a very different kind of experience for me, right? Or push it a little bit in another direction and say, I only have $100, but I want to get this extremely wonderful experience as well. What are some options? How can I explore that? You are a tour operator who really wants my custom, so you're going to help me in the best way possible. What will your suggestions be for me? So again, you're trying out different things and pushing these models in different ways. Don't think of prompt engineering, again, as in getting the perfect answer. That is not it. Prompt engineering is really to expand the way you think of problems and look at different ways of solving problems, okay? And so play with the prompts and see what works for you. Okay, and so with that, hopefully I've given you a broad overview of prompt engineering. Like I mentioned, I'll share all the links with you as well.